Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. It's the 2nd of May, and that can only mean I have to look back on my reading in April and come up with the tops and flops, the best reads and the disappointing reads of the month. And as always, we start with the tops, and within the tops category, we start with the book that I thought about the most. And that was, without any doubt, Evie Wyld's latest novel, published last year, The Bass Rock. Evie Wyld is an Australian author, and I've been meaning to read this book since it came out last year, mainly because I really loved her previous book, All the Birds Singing. I thought that was a brilliant novel. And by the way, while I was reading this, finally, it won the Stellaprize in Australia, which is the most important prize for female literature, fiction and nonfiction. The book is set in 3 timelines. The oldest one is in the 1700s, where you have Sarah, who is accused of being a witch and who has to flee the village. Then we jump forward until just after the Second World War. The same setting, the same place, the Bass Rock, which is a rock on the coast of Scotland. And you have Ruth, a woman who has just married a man with 2 children. So his previous wife died, and she has to navigate her new role as a wife and stepmother. And then we jump again until the present day, when Vivian, after Ruth has died, comes to the house at the Bass Rock to clean out the house, to sell the house. These 3 women all have their history, which is explored in the book. And in between the story of these 3 women, you have short little stories about unnamed women and the violence against them. So this book is an exploration of the violence that women had to endure over the centuries up until the present day. Violence in different forms, or injustices in different forms. And of course, as you know, this is a subject that is very close to my heart. So it's not surprising when you hear the story of the book that this was the book that I really thought about a lot. It is a political book. It is an accusation against the violence towards women, against the treatment of women, but it's also a really, really, really good work of literary fiction. So it's extremely well written. The characters are well drawn, but there is this political message that kept me thinking about the book a lot. I can certainly recommend it if you want to read about women throughout history in a really interesting novel. And it's not a political essay dressed up as a novel, not at all. The stories are too well told, and the characters are too well developed for that. So highly recommended. And it was the book, like I said, that I thought about the most. Next in the category tops, no, not flops, tops, is the book that surprised me the most. And the surprise can come from various reasons. And this time the surprise was I picked the book really on a whim, and I loved it. I wanted to read another book by an Australian author because, Aussie April, like Evie Wyld and like other books that I read in April. And I was looking for something and found this one on Script, Madeline Ryan, A Room Called Earth. And I had never heard of this author. I remembered then that Mercedes from Mercy's Bookish Musings talked about this book, but I had forgotten already. It's a debut novel, and it's about a young woman. The author is on the autism spectrum, and so is the main character, a young woman, even though the word autism is never used in the book. The young woman in the main character in the book, a young woman is preparing for a party, and the whole book is told in first person from her perspective. And we learn what she does to prepare for the party and how she views the world. And slowly we make our way to the party. She meets people. It's difficult. So it's a one-day story. And it is so brilliant. I have no clue why this book, which came out this March in the UK, why this book is not on the long list, short list of the Women's Prize for Fiction. I have no idea. It's really an omission. It's the perspective of this young woman. We learn something about a character with autism, but it's not, a medical book. It's just a very engaging story about a young woman who happens to have autism. So I thought that the book was brilliant. It was a big surprise because I hadn't, I forgot about Mercy's, who she loved the book as well, by the way, but I had forgotten about that. I had never heard of this author. That's what I thought. I picked the book at random because I saw it on Script, and it was a delight. If that happens, that's just wonderful. And I highly, highly recommend you check out A Room Called Earth by Madeline Ryan. And the third and final category in the tops is the best nonfiction book I read. And again, it's an Australian author. Yes, I did read a lot of Australian books in April because Aussie April. And this one is about whales. Rebecca Giggs' Fathoms, The World in the Whale. And I buddy-read this book with Heidi from My Reading Life. And that was perfect because Heidi, unlike me, has an understanding of science, and she could provide me with context about the book that I would have otherwise missed. So that was just my luck. The book, Rebecca Giggs is an Australian author. I said that already. She's a journalist. I remembered her from an article she wrote in The Atlantic about bats. And this one is a personal journey into the world of whales. It starts when Rebecca Giggs encounters a dying whale, a humpback whale on the coast of, at the coast, comes to the coast and is stuck there and dies. 3 days of agony. And after that, she explores various aspects of whale life. How the climate change affects them, how pollution affects them, for instance, about plastic in the sea, our idea about whales, where they come from, evolution-wise. So in each chapter, she focuses on one of those themes. And it's a mixture of her personal experience when she interviews people, when she goes to look at a museum or at exhibits or whatever, and a science, long-form science essay. The writing was sometimes a bit over my head. I felt it was really, using too expensive language for my taste. But still, it's a fabulous book about a fantastic animal and our fascination with this mammal, where it comes from, why we are so fascinated by whales. Yes, it was an absolute delight. And again, the delight was greatly enhanced because I could buddy read it with Heidi. But even without Heidi, I can certainly recommend this book if you are interested in nature writing, if you're interested in whales, and I mean, who isn't, then this book comes highly recommended. So these were my 3 tops of April. On to the flops. And as usual, I have 2. There were couple of disappointing reads this month, and I picked 2, the biggest disappointments, if you will. And the first one was actually the only disappointing read that I picked for Aussie April. Also a book that I picked on a whim. A whim in the sense that I hadn't planned on reading it. I had never heard of the book, but it was shortlisted for the Stellaprize, and that is SL Lim, Revenge, A Murder in 3 Parts, which came out last year. shortlisted for the Stella, like I said, and it sounded interesting. SL Lim is an Australian writer born in Singapore, and the book is set partly in Singapore and partly in Sydney. And we follow the story of Yanni, starting from Yanni as a young girl with her sibling younger brother Shan. And even though Yanni is the intelligent one and should be the one who goes to college, her brother is favored, and he goes to college. He goes to Oxford even, and then moves from Singapore to Australia, to Sydney, and makes a fortune there. Whereas Yanni just has to stay home and, has to find work, employment, and then care for her aging parents. And she hates her brother. So it's not a spoiler if I tell you the whole book is about revenge and a murder in 3 parts about the murder of her brother. If you know that from the beginning, you have to do something to make it interesting because you know what will happen. And the whole problem with the book, at least for me, was that I was utterly, utterly bored. I didn't find the story interesting. I didn't find the characters interesting, but certainly the plot, it was like, okay, and then finally we get to the point where the murder takes place. I don't know whether it was me. If you have read the book, let me know how you experience it. I have no idea why this was shortlisted for the Stella. To be honest, because it was not badly written or anything, but it was just utterly, utterly boring. And the second book in the flops category was an even bigger disappointment than Revenge, for 2 reasons. First of all, because everybody seemed to love the book, and I was really looking forward to it. I featured the book in one of my new releases video when it came out earlier this year, so I was really, part of the hype, as if you will, and it was a huge disappointment, and that is Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. Longlisted for the Women's Prize, didn't make the shortlist, and there was a lot of commotion about that, which I never understood. Tori Peters is a trans woman, and trans women are women. So, of course, this book has the right to be on the long list for the Women's Prize. It doesn't quality-wise, but that's a different issue. I just didn't think it was a good book. It was really mediocre. It's a debut, so, I gave it 2 stars on Goodreads because it's a debut. The premise sounded fascinating. You have 3 main characters, a trans woman called Reese in her 30s, her ex-girlfriend Ames, who used to be Amy but detransitioned back into Ames, and Ames's new girlfriend, a career woman called Katrina. And the premise of the book is when Katrina is pregnant by Ames, and then the 3 try to find a way to have Reese as an additional mother. Yeah, I don't know why either, but that's the premise of the book. My first annoyance was that I felt I was stuck in a male chauvinist fantasy land, which was a real disappointment because it's a female writer. All the women were had stereotypical worldviews, like, you need validation from a man. Women have this deep urge to become mothers. If you are divorced, you suck. And if you are a career woman like Katrina, you turn into a crying, emotional blob once you are pregnant. That's just not a worldview that I find very interesting. The second was that I didn't feel the references to Sex and the City worked well for me. It's mentioned a lot, this TV show, and I loved watching it for entertainment and for the fashion. But it was certainly not a show that I would consider a model for how to live as a woman. I mean, all the women in the show just want to get married and find the one. That's not my worldview as a woman. And then the third thing that I thought was not good was the writing. You have, especially in dialogue, when Reese is talking, she has these sweeping, grand statements about the world and women in particular that sound like coming straight from an MFA program, and sound really profound. But if you then read it again, it's just hollow phrases. So, for instance, when Reese talks to Katrina, she explains why she loves divorced cis women, because divorce is a transition narrative. I mean, who talks like that to a friend? A transition narrative, and it's bullshit. In addition to that, it's bullshit. It's only a transition narrative or story, I would say, if your identity as a woman is defined by the fact that you're married. And I mean, I was married and divorced, and I wasn't defined by the fact that I was married. And I hope that we have, surpassed the fact when in the 50s women were defined by the fact that they were married or not. So it was just a part boring, part annoying. It didn't go anywhere. There were a lot of parties. There was a lot of, shopping for baby cribs and stuff that I'm just not very interested in. So I know that a lot of people love this book. I don't know why, but for me, and thankfully for my buddy reader as well, it was just a huge disappointment, a mediocre book, badly written with a worldview that was just coming out of the 1950s. So no, I can't recommend it, unfortunately. So these were my tops and flops for the month of April. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments which books you liked or hated or were disappointed about in April. And I'll see you all soon in the next one.